So today we're going to be discussing what astrology shows us or teaches us about relationships. And so I hate to be a relationship coach type YouTuber and shit, and that's not what this is about. But more so, this is just something interesting I like to do using astrology, where I put the sign in the ascendant and I look at all of the houses through the 12 houses, and each house teaches us something about that sign. So in this case, relationships are ruled by the sign of Libra. So that's the chart we're going to be looking at today. This video is going to be highly pseudo, so hopefully that doesn't off-put some people. But the information is going to be interesting nonetheless, and this is just my interpretation, because astrology is like intuitive and there's so many interpretations for each combination of planets and placements and houses and signs. So anyways, Libra in the first house, this is basically the perspective of a relationship, but basically the relationship, which is Libra, must be made a part of the identity of the individuals involved, or else this would not be a real, true relationship as per astrology. And just, we don't even have to bring astrology into this. Like, it would not be a real relationship if each individual does not make the relationship a part of their identity. The first house is about I. It's about me. It's who you are. It's I am. Like, it's our name, our identity, everything. So just like you state your name, you state your occupation, you say, I'm Bill, or I'm Sally, I'm an astronaut, I'm this. Well, also, astrology is showing us that for a relationship to be real, it must be made a part of the identity. So this would be, I'm married, or I'm this person's friend. So an example of if this doesn't happen is that this would be like somebody that doesn't let other people know their ties to you. So like they don't. So it's like, imagine somebody that's your friend. Let's not talk about romance, but let's bring this to friends. But they don't tell anybody else they're friends with you, or they don't acknowledge it. They don't make it a part of their identity. Well, astrology indicates that this actually undermines the relationship. And this will actually contradict the meaning of relationships. Or imagine you have a partner, but they don't want to put a label on it, quote unquote. Or they don't want to make that relationship part of who they are. Then that's not a real commitment. That's what the seventh house being in Aries is about, or the first house being in Libra. That's what it kind of indicates. And, think about how that kind of feels. Like, imagine being friends with somebody, but when people ask them, about you, they don't acknowledge their friendship or their relationship to you. But meanwhile, when they're around you, they get all personal and deep. But around others, they don't make their relationship a part of your identity. You see how that contradicts the idea of what a commitment is, or what an interaction or a relationship is, So that is something I wanted to add too that I forgot. And that also indicates that you guys don't have a real common objective. That is not a real interpersonal commitment or objective. That's more someone being in it for personal reasons, whatever it may be. Usually it might be a hidden motive or something that they get out of it, but they don't want to carry out your end, or they don't even want to acknowledge the relationship or the objective that must be made in order for a relationship to prosper. So Libra has Scorpio in the second house. The second house is about resources. So in a relationship, resources tend to be shared. And by the way, in this video, I'll be discussing what each house means. And then also, how you could fix that house, or if there's a problem, I'll explain, okay, what's the negative version that's causing problems for each placement, for each house, I guess. So in this case, the second house is in Scorpio. Scorpio is about interpersonal forms of dependency. It's about shared assets. It's about like mixing resources, mixing energy, and yeah, it's about exchange. So in a relationship, what astrology teaches us is that what the form of resources is it's shared. So the negative thing, so something that could be negatively impacting a relationship is if resources are not shared. Now, there's various forms of relationships. You know, some people are not meant to be that close, but what the thing is about this case is relationships. In this case, we're talking about something with a common objective. So if you and somebody else have a common objective, there's going to be a problem if the resources in order to reach that objective are not shared. Or that's kind of like it's undermining the relationship, you know, or the common objective. So that's what astrology teaches us in terms of what resources look like in a relationship. So next up, we have third house. Third house is about communication. And for relationships, the third house is in the sign of Sagittarius. Sagittarius is about faith. It also has to do with belief, religions, and just believing things, having faith in the unknown, and taking a risk. It's about risks and gambles. So what astrology teaches us about relationships is that in order to have a functional relationship, communication will have to be backed by faith. So something that could be undermining a relationship is if the communication does not have faith. If there is a lack of faith in the communication, this will undermine the relationship. That's what astrology is teaching us, with the third house being in Sagittarius. So yeah, blind faith and just taking a risk, taking people's word for things. So if there's an inability to do that, or if this has been compromised, this will certainly undermine relationships, common objectives, partnerships, etc. Anything Libra related. Next up, we have Capricorn in the fourth house. The fourth house is about personal interests. It's about family, and it's about emotional security. Even tangible security, like material security. And it's just about the creative process. And it's about creative projects. For relationships, the fourth house is in Capricorn. Capricorn has to do with the public. It has to do with our career. It has to do with the emotions of others, because it opposes Cancer. Cancer is our own emotions, and the opposition shows others. And that's why Capricorn is what we're known for, because it's the things that we do that impact the feelings of others, especially on a public level, because Capricorn is in the public sector of the chart. It's in the fourth quadrant, the top left. So what this is showing us about relationships is that the interest in a relationship, or the shared interest, must be some sort of public objective, or making some sort of impact on the public's emotions, or doing things that matter on a societal scale. So for a relationship to thrive, the personal interests of the individuals must be on, well, the objective of the relationship on a personal level must be to do things that matter out in the world. So like build a relationship in order to achieve something. You know what I mean? There must be a common objective. And in this case, it needs to have an impact on the world. Like, you don't just get in a relationship and only do it for personal reasons. You must team up with this person in order to make a bigger impact together. That's what it's showing. And this is where all the personal effort goes into, because the fourth house is our personal efforts, our personal interests. So there's this okay, yeah, basically I covered it. There's this personal interest in impacting the public or doing something of importance, because Capricorn is importance, it's authority, it's our career, it's, yeah, you guys get it. But next up, we have the fifth house. The fifth house is about ego. It's about our character. It's about our confidence. And what astrology teaches us about relationships is that ego must be replaced with more logical approach to things and more humility, because the fifth house is in the sign of Aquarius. Aquarius is about detachment. It's about also logic. So for a relationship to work, what astrology teaches us is that there must be some sort of detachment from ego to a certain extent. And ego must be replaced with what is good for the group, or what's good for humanity, or it must be replaced with a sense of humility and being aware of one's true size and true significance, you know? So in the case that there is an individual in a relationship that is too full of themselves or thinks everything revolves around them, astrology shows that this will undermine the relationship, because the fifth house must be in Aquarius, meaning there must be some sort of logical analysis of oneself, and there must be some sort of humility from both individuals. Next up, we have the sixth house. The sixth house is about criticism. It's about details, observations, and it's about doing things well. And it's also our insight into the unconscious of other people. Virgo in tarot is associated with not Virgo. Mercury is associated with the magician in tarot. And the magician is somebody that can create illusions and stuff. And Mercury is the ruler of Virgo. And the reason why Virgos can create illusions and be magicians, and so can Geminis to a certain extent, but specifically Virgos, it's because they have insight or vision into the unconscious of others, because they're so focused on small details. Well, the archetype of Virgo, so maybe not all Virgos, but those with strong Virgos, like true Virgo people that have all the right placements, they will have like this detail-oriented point of view. They'll see the small things. And so they can play with factors that other people are not paying attention to. And thus they can create magic tricks, essentially. They can do things where you didn't even realize that they did it. Or they can... and this is what magic comes from. If you've seen like magic shows and all magic trick books, it's all about having people focused on something else so they don't see all the details of what is actually causing the phenomenon of your trick. And so the sixth house can be very critical of details, and it can be observant of things that people aren't aware of, and that people gloss over. And so this is why it can show a lot of critical or criticism tendencies. And what astrology teaches us about relationships regarding the sixth house is that, in this case, the sixth house is in the sign of Pisces. The sign of Pisces is about unconsciousness, and it's about assumptions. It's about glossing things over. So in relationships, there must be a ability to let things slide regarding little details and little imperfections. For the relationship to work or to thrive or prosper, there must be an ability for each partner to let the little imperfections slide, especially if they are not important, if they are just something that the individual notices. And there must be an ability to unconditionally accept certain flaws, or to just not to kind of be lazy in terms of it. Like don't try to control so much, because the sixth house can show control, and the sign of Pisces is about allowing, you know. So in a relationship, if there's somebody that's too critical of the other, or that constantly makes the other person into like a servant, then it becomes very one-sided. And what astrology shows is that this will undermine the relationship when people or individuals within the relationship cannot let certain things slide, especially if they're not important. And if people can just allow things that the other person is unconscious of, to just be, instead of always reminding them of stuff and doing it to an extreme, you know? So next up, we have the seventh house. The seventh house shows interpersonal objectives. And in this case, the seventh house is in the sign of Aries. So relationships must be approached with our own investment of energy. And astrology is showing that when it comes to interpersonal objectives, it must be backed by our own focus, our own attention, and our own energy. And so that's what astrology is showing us, with seventh house being in Aries, which is the sign of action, focus, perception, and energy. And one's objectives and one's intentions must be for some sort of interpersonal objective in this case. And so if somebody, or if the people in the relationship are in it and they are in it for selfish reasons, or if their focus and their investment is into selfish or self-oriented objectives, astrology is showing that this undermines or contradicts the true meaning of what a relationship is. Because the focus, the attention, the energy, the self is invested into an interpersonal goal, a common objective. That's the best way to put it. A common objective. Okay? It's not what can I get from you and what you get from me in exchange. That's more like Scorpio. And that's the sign of codependency, power struggles, etc. In a relationship, it's about a common objective. So be sure to analyze your own relationships and be aware and think to yourself, do we have a common objective here, or is this person only in it for themselves, or am I only trying to get something? And should we try to come together and make an objective? Especially one that will affect the public or affect the greater society. This will hold a relationship together. That's what astrology shows us, with that fourth house being in Capricorn. That's the security. That's the foundation of the entire relationship. Public objectives, public impact. Even if it's just being seen. You know, relationships that are on social media tend to last longer just because they have that public objective of carrying out a certain image. And just because they want to impact people's emotions, they want to be seen, that actually keeps certain relationships together. I don't know if that's the best objective, but that's one way that Capricorn in the fourth house can play out and give a stability to a relationship, is when there's a public element to this. So, yeah. But anyways, we were talking about seventh house in Aries and how the focus, the attention, the action, Aries, must be put into a common objective. Seventh house. An interpersonal objective, an interpersonal way of seeing things. Okay, next up, we have the eighth house. So the eighth house is about power. And in this case, the eighth house is in Taurus. So astrology shows us that in a relationship, each individual must have power. Because Taurus is the sign of having. It's a resource that we have. And as we remember, the second house was in Scorpio, meaning that the resources should be shared in a relationship. And now the eighth house is in Taurus, indicating that individuals should feel like they have power in a relationship. So what will undermine a relationship is if an individual does not feel like they have power, because then they can't have any influence on the common objective, if there even is one. And this can become more like a narcissistic, empathic interplay, and more like a codependent interplay. So in order to best support your relationships, make sure you establish some sort of power in it, or protect, your own power in the relationship in order to be best fulfilled. Obviously, some relationships are toxic, and of course, then you can ignore this rule. But each individual must have power in an ideal relationship. That's how it is. The 8th house is in Taurus, the sign of having. 8th house is about power. And yeah, you guys get it. Next up, we have Sagittarius, the 9th house, which is associated with Sagittarius, in the sign of Gemini. So the 9th house is like philosophy. It's beliefs, it's faith, like I said, and it's education, it's learning, it's knowledge. So in this case, it's in the sign of intellect and of our communication and of our mind. So what astrology shows us about relationships is that there must be an ability to influence the mind of the other person. And there must be a belief in one's own words, a belief in one's own mind as well, and an ability to convince others or to teach others and to indoctrinate the other person to a certain extent. And to like at least have your input and use your communication in a way that impacts the mind of the other person. So there's a need to be able to influence. If this is not accurate, or if this does not happen, if there is no ability to influence, and if each individual can't relate to the mind of the other person, then this will undermine the relationship. Or if the other person doesn't listen. And also, if you don't have faith in your own words, your own opinions, and what you need, and asking for things, there must be a spontaneous ability to ask, because Gemini is about questions. It's about asking. And Sagittarius, the 9th house, which is like the sign of Sagittarius, is about faith. So and it's also about spontaneous action. So there must be an ability to spontaneously ask questions or ask for things, and also to state one's opinion and to be confident in your opinion, to have faith in your opinion, or else you succumb to the other person. Or that would usually mean that the other person is more dominant. But so that's what astrology teaches us about faith and philosophy when it comes to relationships. You must have a strong philosophy or faith within your own idea of things, but be able to communicate it diplomatically in a way that other people can understand. So next up, we have the 10th house in Cancer. And what the 10th house is it's the reputation. It's the public image. It's also the public impact that a relationship has. And, in this case, the reputation is all relating to the relationship. And what astrology teaches us about the reputation of a relationship, and also like what is public, is that it must actually be more private and more reserved. So, in other words, what is put out into the world must only be the shell. It must only be the exterior. You don't put the meat of the relationship out. Cancer is the crab, and that's the symbol of the sign of Cancer. And in this case, it's in the public house. So there must be a tough shell to the relationship. And Cancer is all about privacy protecting one's values, being reserved. So there must be an ability to be reserved about public business. Like you can't let out private stuff into the public. There must be a barrier to it. Unfortunately, there's no way to completely stop information from getting out. But what astrology shows is that a relationship will do just fine when there are barriers to the information, or when all the private stuff is not divulged publicly. Instead, in public, there is a reserved approach to things. And also your objectives must be more private. You must keep them, you must move in silence, basically, when it comes to a relationship for it to best prosper. So, in other words, if there's individuals that like to expose everything that's happening in the relationship, this will undermine the relationship. That's what astrology shows, because this contradicts the whole concept. And also, this is not so much a relationship. This is just a means for the person that's doing this to get attention. Or really, it takes away whatever security would be in the relationship, if that makes any sense. So one must be aware not to be so public about personal affairs. So when you see celebrities or like just people exposing drama of the relationship publicly, this is like an example of what not to do and what will undermine or create instability in the relationship. Because things can tend to fall apart at that point. When you start to let everything out, then it's very hard to come back and like set things straight again, you know? When everything's been just completely burned down, like when the bridge has been burnt, and when all the secrets, all the privacy, all the objectives get compromised like that. Also, you know, this is kind of like the fourth house being in Capricorn as well, where the personal objective must be to make some sort of public impact. That's what fourth house in Capricorn was showing us. But when it comes to public relations, in terms of the relationship, there must be privacy. You know, there must be a wall or a boundary, and people must get to know you before you let them know what's going on with you. That's what 10th house in Cancer is about. Private public image, reserved public image. Instead of talking, you must more so just observe and listen to what's going on around you and keep the relationship to yourself. Cancers are very observant, you know, very quiet. And that whole sign has to do with, you know, privacy. So that's what astrology teaches us about relationships in terms of the public image and the public business. So in other words, you know, privacy when it comes to the business of the individuals and what's going on. And with Libra being about a common objective, this could also be about business partnerships. It doesn't just have to be relationships of the romantic kind. But like in a business partnership, you don't want to let the public know what the objective is between you guys, or of the other person's secrets, or what they've let you know. You know, you can think of this placement as having like the energy of a non-disclosure agreement. That's kind of how the 10th house being in Cancer is. To have a strong relationship, there must be some sort of non-disclosure. Okay. Next up, we have the 11th house in Leo. The 11th house shows our individuality. It shows logic. It shows higher goals. But in this case, I want to talk about the individuality aspect. And in the sign of Leo, this is about confidence. So for a relationship to best prosper, each individual must have confidence in their individuality and must be expressive of their individuality and of their personal interests and what they do in their extracurricular time or their post job time. You know, the 11th house is things we do after hours, after work especially. and it's friends. So like friend groups, associations, our network communication. So there must be an ability to be expressive of one's interests, and that basically sums that up. I feel like there's something else I wanted to say, but I'm gonna just add it later or make another video about it if I remember. But there's definitely something else to this house placement. But something that will undermine a relationship is when an individual is not expressive of their individuality or their true selves and their own interests. In that case, this would be more like a false relationship or like a front, you know? So in a relationship, you must strive as much as possible to be yourself, and to be confident in yourself, even if the other person does, like, if you're not sure they're going to stick around. That means that if they don't, that's not somebody that was meant to be in a relationship with you. So, yeah. And the other thing is, if the other person is not expressive of their individuality, then there's going to be secrets, you know? And ultimately, they're going to be expressing this individuality outside of the relationship. They're going to be indulging and having fun or pursuing their interests behind your back because they are too scared to show you their true self. So they're going to have friend groups outside, and that's going to compromise the relationship, because then this is where business gets shared publicly, and this undermines like everything else, you know? There's so many ways that the relationship falls apart when people cannot be upfront with their individuality and who they are, and have that bravery to be themselves. There's something else to this placement. There's something else it's not coming to me right now, but there's definitely something that has to do with the ego of others too. But for now, we're just going to keep it at that. The fact that there must be a confidence in one's individuality and an expression of one's interests. Finally, we have the 12th house in Virgo. So what astrology teaches us about relationships is that we must be critical of our own unconscious, our own subconscious mind, our own insecurities, because all of those are themes of the 12th house. The 12th house is the unconscious. It's the house of undoing. It's the house of insecurities, partially secrets. It's kind of like the 8th house, but it's a different type of secret. And it's about what's foggy or unclear to ourselves, but that impacts our perception. It's also our imagination of things and our vision and the way we perceive things. And Virgo is the sign of criticism and of observation and of noticing every little detail as possible. So astrology says or teaches us that in a relationship, there must be a high self-criticism of one's own unconscious, or one must be observant or be introspective and be able to be critical of themselves. And also, there must be an ability to help oneself. Now, this is completely backwards to what we think relationships should be in the mainstream or the way that they teach it or display it. But in reality, a relationship is showing us, astrology is showing us that in relationships, people should be able to introspect into their subconscious, into their wounds, and into their own healing. And they must help the other person help them, if that makes any sense. Because Virgo is the sign of service. It's the sign of help. And the 12th house is the house where we are helped, because it's right behind our ascendant. It's on the side of ourselves, but it's the part of us that's unconscious. And this is where we are a victim a lot of times, or where we receive third-party help, where we receive help from other people. And it's about institutions and all this stuff. And it's a house of healing, of loss and detachment. A lot of times, like clearing out baggage, clearing out old things. And with the sign of help or of service in the 12th house, this indicates one's service must be applied to themselves. Like they must be able to help themselves to a certain extent. And what will happen if an individual is not self-critical of their unconscious, is not introspective, and does not have a desire to help themselves, is that they will become like a victim, or not a victim necessarily, but even a burden or like a leech on the other person. They'll make the other person feel responsible and guilty for everything. They're not able to be critical of themselves, so they put it on the other person. So it's very important to be able to introspect and always relate to how things are your fault, your own fault, especially when you have a problem with the other person. And this is completely the reverse of how we perceive relationships down here on Earth on the third dimension, and in mainstream society and shit. In reality, when we have problems with the other person, this is an opportunity to look in the mirror and look at ourselves and see how we can make it our responsibility, or how we can find the link. Sometimes we don't have to do the work. Sometimes it's not our work to fix the problem. But if we can see what in us is related, then we can make adjustments, or we can make the person have to face what needs to be fixed. But if we're not aware of what our own issue is, and we're blaming superficial issues we see in the other person, then we have no ability to either take responsibility or to set boundaries, because nothing has been established on a personal level of what is yours to carry. So you must be very sure of what is yours to carry, and you must help yourself as much as possible. That's what astrology teaches us about relationships. And when there's an individual that doesn't help themselves and plays the victim or plays the blamer role, the other person becomes responsible, or can feel burdened, or can be turned into somebody that's manipulated by that person. So anyways, that is what astrology teaches us about the sign of Libra. That is all the houses that Libra has. And this is how relationships play out. These are the 12 laws of relationships based on astrology. So anyways, I hope that was insightful, informative, entertaining, and so on. If you enjoyed, please don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And other than that, for a natal chart reading or an inquiry about synastry, love, or even just personal inquiries, the information is in the description to get in contact with me for that. And so I appreciate you guys watching. And other than that, I will see you guys in another video.